Imagine your sister leaving her husband for his best friend and then asking to stay with you. Would you let her? I'm dealing with some real family drama and could use an outside perspective. My sister Emily, 30F, has left her husband, Mark, 30M, to be with his best friend, Tom, 32M. Now she's asking if she can stay with me, and I honestly have no idea if I'm being unreasonable by saying no. A bit of background. Emily and Mark have been together since high school. They were one of those couples everyone thought was perfect. Together for over a decade, married for 5 years, and completely solid. Or so we thought. Mark is a genuinely good guy. He's the type who'd drop everything to help someone out, has patched up my parents' roof more times than I can count, and has been there for me through my own worst breakups. He's basically part of our family, and we've all grown to love him like a brother. Well, it turns out that about a year ago, Emily and Tom, Mark's best friend, started connecting in a different way. I think it began as them confiding in each other about their marriage struggles, and at some point they convinced themselves that they were each other's soulmates. Emily swears it wasn't physical until recently, but knowing it's been going on emotionally for so long honestly feels worse. The kicker? Emily didn't even tell Mark herself. Tom's wife Lisa was the one who walked in on them together. She's the one who told Mark, not Emily. She claims she didn't want to hurt him, so I guess she thought, what? That he'd just not notice his wife left him? I don't know. It was a disaster. Mark was crushed, blindsided. He tried calling Emily to talk, but she'd already packed her things and left to stay with a friend, saying she was finally following her heart and that she doesn't owe anyone an apology. Honestly, it all felt cold. Now Emily's asking to stay with me because, according to her, Mom and Dad are being hostile and unsupportive. They're both furious with her, especially my dad, who feels like she's broken up our family and betrayed someone who's been nothing but kind to us. But my mom's in that weird spot of still being her mother and saying she needs support, despite what she did. I told Emily I'm not comfortable letting her stay here. For one thing, my fiancé is close friends with Mark. It would feel like a betrayal to let her stay when we know how badly she hurt him. My fiancé actually said it would be a slap in the face, and I agree. But it's not just loyalty to Mark. This whole thing has shaken how I see my sister. We were close growing up, but the way she's handling this, how easily she's justified tearing someone's life apart, and her complete lack of remorse. It feels like I don't even know her anymore. When I suggested she should give Mark some closure, she lashed out, called me, just like everyone else, and accused me of throwing her under the bus. She even dragged up mistakes I made years ago, saying I'm a hypocrite for not being forgiving. A part of me does feel guilty. I know what it's like to feel lost and rejected, and there's a small part of me that wonders if maybe she's really in a dark place, and I'm abandoning her when she needs family most. But there's a bigger part of me that thinks I'd be enabling her selfishness if I let her stay. She made this mess, and helping her now feels wrong when I see all the damage she's left behind. So now our family is split. My mom keeps saying, family sticks together, and thinks Emily will regret this someday. But my dad doesn't even want to talk to her. He thinks she needs to face the consequences of her choices, and he said he's ashamed of her behavior. Meanwhile, I feel like whatever I do, I'm betraying someone. If I let her stay, I'm betraying Mark, my fiancé, and honestly my own values. I don't want to act like what she did is okay. But if I refuse, I feel like I'm abandoning my sister, and I'm scared I'll regret it if she spirals. When I told her she couldn't stay, she got cold and said I'm just like everyone else, judging her without understanding what she's going through. She keeps saying she feels totally alone and that I'm the last person she thought would turn her away. It's hard to hear that, but every time I picture Mark, blindsided and brokenhearted, I feel sick all over again. I'm struggling to figure out if I'm doing the right thing. Do I support my sister, even after all this, because she's family? Or am I justified in setting this boundary because of the hurt she's caused and her refusal to own up to it? I genuinely can't tell if I'm being fair or if I'm letting my own anger cloud my judgment. Eta for refusing to let my sister stay with me, even if it risks our relationship. Update 1. So, A few days after everything went down, Emily showed up at my place unannounced. No heads up, no text or call, just her standing at my front door with this look that was a mix of exhaustion and frustration. I didn't even want to let her in, but I felt like I had to hear her out. My fiancé wasn't home, thankfully, because he was still fuming about the whole situation, and I didn't want him to have to sit through this conversation. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and just stared at her, waiting for her to say something. Anything that would explain how she'd gotten herself into this mess. Emily didn't waste any time, though. She launched straight into a speech about how everyone had abandoned her, how she felt trapped with Mark for years, and that no one, not even me, had tried to understand what she was going through. According to her, being with Tom felt liberating, and like she was finally living for herself. She talked like she'd been suffocating her whole life and only just now figured out how to breathe again. I just listened, biting my tongue because, honestly, I didn't even recognize this version of her. It was like I was talking to a stranger, not my sister. I asked her why she hadn't at least talked to Mark before running off. Emily's response was, "I didn't know him that." And it hit me like a slap. She went on about how her personal growth was more important than anyone else's expectations, and she couldn't keep sacrificing her happiness to keep other people comfortable. She said Mark was stuck in the past and wouldn't have understood her spiritual awakening. And hearing that made me angry because it felt like she was rewriting their entire history to justify her actions. They weren't perfect, no marriage is, but to paint him as some ball and chain holding her back was just unfair. I told her that Mark wasn't some obstacle she had to overcome. He was a real person with real feelings, and she completely bulldozed him. Her reaction? She actually laughed, like I was the one who didn't get it. She said, "You sound just like Mom and Dad," as if that was supposed to shut me up or something. But it didn't. I told her I wouldn't let her stay with me if she couldn't even acknowledge the hurt she'd caused. At that, she got this look of absolute shock, like I was the one betraying her. And that's when she started guilt-tripping me. Emily kept saying I was all she had left, that everyone else had turned their backs on her and she'd hoped I'd understand because we're sisters. She said family should support each other no matter what, and that I was supposed to be there for her even if no one else would. And yes, that part stung. She was pulling every emotional string she could to get me to back down, but all I could think about was Mark. Mark, who was probably lying somewhere, completely crushed by all this. And here she was, acting like she was the victim. Then Emily did something that honestly threw me off. She brought up an incident from years ago when I was in a bad place after a rough breakup, implying that she'd been there for me and now it was my turn to return the favor. She said I was being a hypocrite, that I'd leaned on her during my lowest point, and it hurt that I was kicking her while she's down. The way she twisted our past to suit her narrative made me feel like I was losing my mind. Yes, she'd supported me through tough times, but what she was asking now wasn't the same thing at all. I wasn't running from responsibility or blowing up someone's life for my own gain. I told her flat out that her situation wasn't just a bad day or a simple mistake. This was betrayal, plain and simple, and there were consequences for that. Emily just stared at me, stunned, and muttered, "You're just like everyone else," judging me without even trying to understand. That was it. She stormed off, making it clear she was done with me, at least for now. I thought that was the end of it, but it turns out it was only the beginning. A few days after that, I got a call from my mom, who was in tears. Apparently, Emily had gone to stay with some friends after I turned her away, and they eventually told her to leave too. She's been bouncing around from place to place, and now she's back at my parents' house, where the tension is thick enough to cut with a knife. My dad, who's usually calm and measured, isn't even speaking to her. He's furious, feels like she's embarrassed the family, and he's even hinted that he doesn't see her the same way anymore. My mom is in the middle, torn between wanting to support her daughter and struggling with what Emily's actions have done to all of us. Here's where it gets even messier. Mark, who's still in pieces over all this, found out that Emily is staying with my parents, and he's been reaching out to them for support, which just makes everything feel even more complicated. My mom's been having these long, emotional conversations with him, trying to help him work through things, while Emily's in the next room pretending it's not happening. I don't know how she can even live like that, knowing the person she's hurt is just one phone call away. But then I found out something that made my blood run cold. Apparently, Emily has been seeing Tom in secret while staying at my parents' place, sneaking out in the evenings to clear her head or whatever excuse she's using. She told Mom it was just to get closure and sort things out. But honestly, who believes that? The worst part is when my dad found out, he threatened to kick her out for good. He said he'd had enough of her lies and selfish behavior, and that she was either ending things with Tom or finding somewhere else to stay. Emily's response? She broke down, saying she felt misunderstood and trapped. She said she was being repressed by our family's expectations, that she was an independent adult who should be allowed to make her own choices. My dad called her bluff, and for a second, I thought she might actually leave, but she didn't. Instead, she's been sulking around the house, acting like everyone's the villain in her story. It's exhausting, and at this point, it feels like we're all just waiting for her to wake up and realize the damage she's done, but I'm not holding my breath. I feel like I'm at a crossroads. Part of me wants to cut her off completely, to let her face the mess she's made without any safety net. Another part wonders if she really is lost and spiraling, and maybe this is just some kind of breakdown. But how much can we really take? Every time I think she's hit rock bottom, she somehow finds a new low. I don't know if I can stand by and watch her destroy everything around her, including herself. Update 2. Since the last update, things have only spiraled further. Emily stayed at our parents' place longer than I thought she would. My dad continued to barely acknowledge her, treating her like she was invisible around the house, while my mom walked on eggshells, torn between keeping her close and dealing with her own disappointment. The tension had turned their home into a complete mess, and they were barely speaking to each other. But things really took a turn when my dad found out that Emily was not only still seeing Tom in secret, but was planning to officially move in with him once the dust settled. One night, after Emily had slipped out yet again, my dad finally snapped. He told my mom he couldn't stand to see his daughter destroy everything he valued, and that he was done watching her treat the family like disposable props. My mom broke down, and I could hear them arguing over the phone. She felt helpless, torn between her love for her daughter and the anger and hurt she felt about Emily's choices. My dad said he couldn't take the constant reminder of what she'd done every day in his own house, and wanted Emily out. He said he couldn't sit back and watch her throw everything away for someone who had zero respect for the family. Then, in what felt like a twist straight out of a soap opera, Mark showed up at my parents' place. Apparently, he'd heard about Emily's plans to officially move in with Tom, and he wanted answers. According to my mom, Mark was calm but visibly devastated, and he told Emily he was there to say goodbye properly, as he felt he never really had the chance. Emily's reaction, though, was what shocked all of us. She seemed indifferent. She just sat there, cold as ice, barely even looking at him. Mark asked her how she could do this, not just to him, but to everyone who loved her. He told her that he never thought she'd turn her back on the people who stood by her for years, and he couldn't understand why she'd chosen this path. Emily's response was brutal. She told him that he'd always played the victim, and that she was done carrying his emotional baggage. She even had the nerve to say that Mark had never made her feel truly alive, and that she'd wasted years of her life trying to fit into a version of herself that was never real. She told him she had no regrets, that she was finally being true to herself, and if he couldn't understand that, then he was holding on to a version of her that never existed. It was like watching her rewrite their entire history, stripping away every good thing they'd shared. Mark left, but not before saying something that hit me hard. He told Emily, "One day, you're going to wake up and realize that there's no one left to pick up the pieces for you. I hope you're ready for that." With that, he walked out, and it felt like a door had closed not just on their marriage, but on a chapter of our family's life. Mark was a fixture in our family. His absence was going to be felt, not just by Emily, but by all of us, and she just stood there unbothered, like it was nothing. After Mark left, my dad told Emily that she needed to move out. He told her that he loved her as his daughter, but he couldn't condone her choices or the way she'd torn everyone's lives apart without a second thought. My mom tried to reason with him, begging him to give Emily more time to come to her senses, but my dad had reached his limit. He told her that if she wanted to throw her life away on Tom, then she could go live it somewhere else. My mom was in tears, torn between wanting to support her daughter and standing by my dad, but Emily made the decision for them. She coldly said, "Fine, I don't need any of you to understand me anyway," and packed her things that night. Now here's where the twist comes in. A few days after Emily moved out, my fiancé got a call from Tom's ex-wife, Lisa. She wanted to warn us that Emily might be in for a rude awakening. Apparently, Tom has a history of finding new soulmates every few years, each time claiming he's finally found himself. Lisa said Tom's pattern is to get emotionally involved with a woman, make her feel like she's the only person who truly understands him. And then, when he gets bored or things get tough, he drops her and moves on to the next. In fact, his previous marriage before Lisa ended in a similar way. This spiritual awakening of his seems to be a recurring theme, but it never lasts. Hearing that made my stomach sink because suddenly Emily's actions made even less sense. She's thrown her entire life away for someone who treats relationships like disposable phases. The kicker is, Lisa mentioned that Tom's already started pulling back, saying he needs space to figure out what he truly wants. Emily has no idea that she's likely just another chapter in his pattern, and by the time she realizes it, she'll have lost everything she once held dear. I tried to reach out to her and tell her what Lisa said, hoping maybe it would give her a moment of clarity. But she ignored me, saying I was just trying to scare her back into conformity. As it stands now, Emily has burned every bridge she had. My parents are heartbroken and barely speaking to each other because my mom feels like she's lost her daughter. And my dad feels like he's lost his family. Mark has cut off all contact with everyone except my dad, who he's still close with. My fiancé is angry with Emily and wants nothing to do with her. And as much as it hurts to say, I feel the same. She's lost in her own world, unable to see past her own selfish desires. And I don't think anything short of complete isolation will shake her awake. The saddest part is, deep down, I think we all know this will end badly for her. One day, when Tom inevitably moves on, she'll look around and realize she's completely alone. By then, though, it may be too late. She's hurt everyone who loved her and burned every connection she had. My mom keeps saying that one day she'll realize the mistake she made. But even if she does, I don't know if any of us will be there when that day comes. Emily made her choice, and the damage is done. I wish I could say I felt peace about it, but instead, I feel a strange emptiness, like our family is forever changed and there's no going back. So, that's it. This has been the most heartbreaking experience I've ever been through. It's not the resolution I wanted, and it's certainly not a happy ending. I hope that maybe someday Emily finds the clarity she needs, but I can't put my life on hold waiting for that day. For now, all I can do is move forward, accept that things will never be the same, and hope that one day I'll be able to remember the sister I loved without feeling the bitterness of what she's become.